best crowd for Thank you. What is that? The 16th of Tammuz, right? Okay. We left off yesterday in the middle of the Gemara. I'll have to go over what we were talking about, and then around 48a. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day, and then the chus of our learning we should have to be immediately. Okay. Kivera machlekes Rabbi, around 48a. Kivera machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about if someone owns the produce of the field, but not the actual field, does that consider that he actually owns the field? It's kinyan aperus, kinyan aguf. And the relevancy we were talking about was when it comes to the temple with the Bikurim, can you recite the passage that says land that you gave me? Praising God, land, is it considered the land that he gave him because he owns the produce? So the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan was that kinyan aperus is kinyan aguf, and the opinion of Rish Lakish, but it was not kinyan aguf. It was not the actual field. Okay. Then we said that this is really a machlekes tanaim. This machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish really goes back earlier to an earlier machlekes. We had an interesting case. We're discussing now a property that was consecrated. And the rule by property that's consecrated is that by the yovel, if it's a property that was an inheritance, so by the yovel it goes to the koyanim. And if it was a property that was purchased that was consecrated, then by the yovel it goes back to the original owner. So let's say someone purchased a property from his father. They would only own this type of land because it was consecrated. It's like given to the Kohanim. So if someone purchases a property from his father and then he consecrates it, then his father passes away. So the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon was that now that he owns the property as an inheritance, so it's considered an inheritance property. So he does not get to keep it. It now goes to the Koyanim because he consecrated it. And the opinion of Reb Meir was that it was considered, such a case was considered a purchased property, not an inheritance property. What would be an inheritance property? That would be if he purchased it from his father, then he inherited, his father passed away, then he inherits it, and then he consecrates it. So we explain the machlekes. What's the machlekes here? Machlekes is when he purchased the property, what does he really own? Only the fruits of the property, because we're talking about by the time of yovel, in the time when yovel is working. So then we say that since he owned the fruits when he purchased it, what does owning the fruits mean? It's machlekes. Does owning the fruits mean that you also own the property? But if it means that you don't own the property, you only own the fruits, then when the father passed away,
because it's a lease.
Because it's like a lease. When the father passed away, now he actually had a real inheritance that now he owns the property. So by the father passing away, something actually takes place. There's actually a transfer there, and now he owns the property. So this is really an inheritance. So that's the opinion of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, that this becomes an inheritance property. But according to, Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. But according to Reb Meir, his view was that when you own the property, when you're leasing the property, when you have the fruits, you already own the body, the actual property itself. Then when the father passed away, what do you gain by that? In the inheritance-wise, nothing. So it's considered a purchase property. Because in becoming an inheritance doesn't give him any more ownership than what it was before. He had already purchased it and he owned everything. But we don't consider it any transfer. So therefore, when he consecrates it before the,
There's no machlokas when it goes to in the hands of the Kohen because it was consecrated to him. There's no lease there, right? Only to the average person.
Yeah. So let's take a look at my lab b'hakam miflgi. It is. It's like a third from the bottom. The line starts late sarich kra. Is it not that the argument between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda is in the following? Reb Meir sever kinyan peiros kinyan guf. That the Reb Meir holds that owning the fruits, which is what he owned originally, is like owning the actual property. And when the father passed away, he does not inherit anything because he owned everything even beforehand, because he purchased it from the father during the father's lifetime. Therefore, it would only be considered an inheritance if the father had first passed away, then he consecrated it. Then that was an inherited field. So that tzarich kra, for that we would need a pasuk that would tell us that, what does the pasuk tell us? That this is considered an inherited field. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, what do they hold? They say, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Safri, they hold kinyan peiros lavka kinyan aguf dami. That owning the produce is not like owning the actual land. So therefore, when the father passed away, they actually acquired the land. And over here, when the father passed away, he actually does inherit something. Therefore, if the father passed away and then he consecrates it, I don't need a pasuk to tell me anything over there because that's a regular inheritance. First, he only owned the fruit. Now he owns the actual property he inherited. The rule is going to be a regular field of inheritance. When do we require the pasuk? That would only be, he would require it only if he purchased it from the father, consecrates it, and then the father passes away. That because it was eligible for inheritance, it's considered that it's an inheritance. Otherwise, if it's an actual inheritance, then it's a regular inheritance.
But if it's just sold to someone, the land, and according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, it's just the produce is
right.
Not, it is considered.
According to Rabbi Yehuda,
considered part of the land.
It's not.
It's not. So therefore, my question is, would they still be chayiv for Meiser and Peah and all this?
Yeah.
The land. They would, even though it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, because when a Jew grows produce, even if it's not in his land, he's chayiv.
But it's not his produce, according to these.
No, it's their produce. It's just not his land.
Oh, it's their produce. It's
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah. Okay. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, this is where we left off yesterday. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, Leila Mei Malach, really, I can tell you, basically what we just did was we made the Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish into a Machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, which that would be the opinion of Reish Lakish, and versus Reb Meir, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. We made a Machlekes Amiraim into a Machlekes Tanam, which it does not like to do. The Gemara says, Rav Nachman Yitzchak comes along and says, Leila Mei Malach, really, I can tell Rabbi Shimon, Kin Peiros, Kin Yaguf Dami. Really, everyone agrees that kinyan peiros kinyan aguf, that would be what Rabbi Yochanan's view was. V'hacha, so why over here do they say that we don't need a pasuk to tell me that the pasuk is only here to tell me if he consecrates it before he inherits it because it's eligible? Rabbi Shimon Krashkach v'darash. They're learning it from a pasuk. They have an extra word in the pasuk. It goes like this: Lichtei brachmana imestei mikdasei asheloi achuzasei. The pasuk actually says, We're talking about if it's a purchased field, then the purchased field goes back to the original owner at the time of the Jubilee. But the way it says it, a purchased field which is not an inheritance. It says a purchased field which is not an inheritance field. Why does it have to say not an inheritance field? Why does it have to add the word field? My mistake. What is it coming to teach me? It's coming to teach me that extra word is coming to teach me one additional halacha. In other words, it works like this. If he purchases a field and he owns everything, like according to Reb Meir's view, which we were saying before, and then he inherits the field, so he doesn't really gain anything. So we're saying, but nevertheless, if he then consecrates it, it's still considered an inheritance. Okay. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon saying not only that, but even if he inherits, he purchases the field, then he consecrates it, and then he inherits it, it's still considered an inheritance field. Now, how do they get that? Because just the fact that if he purchases it, inherits it, then consecrates it, that's already considered an inheritance, even though he gains nothing by that inheritance. That's all the pasuk could tell me. It can't tell me even more than that if he consecrates it before he inherits it, because it's eligible for an inheritance, it's considered an inheritance. So the Gemara says, yes, it could tell me that, because there's an extra word in the pasuk. Amar Rabbi Yosef says, this is a new piece. Ilab Rabbi Yochanan, if not for Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that kinyan appears to kinyan aguftami, that owning the produce is considered like owning the actual property, we wouldn't be able to find our hands and our feet in this study hall. Because Rabasi says, name Rabbi Yochanan, if brothers inherit from the father, every Jubilee year they have to return it to the estate and redivide it after the Jubilee. Why? They're considered purchasers. Just like every purchased property goes back to the estate on the Jubilee. So the brothers that divided the inheritance. So if that's the case, if we would say that owning the produce is not considered like owning the actual property, who would be able to recite the passage when he brings the Bikurim that this is the property that you gave me? Anyone that had ever inherited a property is only a purchaser. If he's a purchaser, then it returns by the Jubilee. Returns by the Jubilee, that means he only owns the produce. If he only owns the produce, then he can't say the passage. So the only person that could really say the passage was only someone that was a single child, son of a single child, son of a single child, all the way back to Yeshua ben Nun when they inherited the land. Otherwise, everything would be considered purchased because it would have to return to the estate at the Jubilee, and they really only own the produce. They would never be able to recite that passage. So thank God for Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that he says that if you own the produce, it's as if you own the property. So then you can still recite the passage even though you're an inheritor and you had siblings or your uncles had siblings, whatever. Rabbi Meir is before Rabbi Yochanan, yeah. Rabbi Meir is a friend of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and he's a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are students of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. They're a generation or two later. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is a contemporary of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda's children, Rabbi Shimon's children. And then Rabbi Yochanan is a student of people that are students of Rabbi. He may have been by Rabbi when he was young. Okay. Amar Rava. Rava says, I know what you just told me, Basi, how important the view of Rabbi Yochanan is, but Krum Masnisim Saila Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish really has a support from a verse, and he also has a support from a brisa. The pasuk says, "B'mispar shnei tvus yimachalach." Is it yimachalach or yimkalach? Yimachalach. The amount of produce, years of produce, is what is being sold, which means that if someone sells something by the yovel, he's only selling the produce. He's not actually selling the field. And this is during the time of the Yovel existing. And now what we're seeing from that is that you really don't own the field during the, it's really just a lease. You don't actually own the field. Masnisa, and another proof, is from a brisa. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. This is interesting. It happens like this. Let's say a father owns a property and he sold it. The father passed away. So the brothers divide up the inheritance. Now there's a property that is deserving to come back to the father's estate because at the Yovel it's going to return. So the oldest brother gets a double portion. The firstborn gets a double portion. Only thing is he only gets a double portion of things that are actually in the possession of the father, not things that are eligible to come into the possession of the father. So is that property? Yeah. So is that property that was sold considered in the father's possession, or is it considered not in the father's possession? It's only eligible to come into the father's possession. So depending on if the firstborn would take a double portion, this is very relevant. So the Brisa says that the firstborn takes a double portion because it's considered in the possession of the father. Now, could you say that? It must be because the father still owns the property, and it's only the produce that the purchaser has only considered least. Well, that's quite a proof. Amar Abaya Naktina, and Abaya comes in. He says, we've established that Baal B'nechsi Ishtei Tzarech Hasha, that if a man is going to go to court over his wife's property, he's going to defend his wife in court, so he needs a power of attorney to do that. He can't just show up and say, what do you mean? It's my wife's property. I eat the produce from my wife's property, so it's considered mine. He can't do that. Why? Because eating the produce doesn't mean you own the property. Yeah, back to Rish Lakish. But this would only be if they're not discussing the produce of the property. But once they're discussing the produce of the property, then once he has rights to discuss the produce, which is really his, then he can already start discussing. He can already go and enter into discussion about the actual property itself, and discuss that in court. Okay, Hadron Lacha Sheleach. And we start a new parak. Taisa says that this parak doesn't have much to do with the get, although it has like a little reference to it. But really, the main thing why this comes in is because since we were discussing things that were for the betterment of the world, called the Tikkun Olam. So we now discuss another thing that's because of Tikkun Olam. Okay, goes like this. Nizakin, mostly monetary loss. And Nizakin, damages. Damages is like, an ox gorge someone else's ox, and ate his produce from the, from the field, that type of stuff. Shamalam b'idiyas. When you come to collect the money for those damages, if the person doesn't have actual cash to pay for it, so you can take his property. Which type of property do you take? Can he give you his desert property and that no one wants, somewhere in Wyoming or something? I don't know. No, he has to give you his best property. Shamalam b'idis, his actually best property. People that the most desirous property. That's when it comes to damages. Let's say someone owes you money and you want to go collect. So he doesn't have cash, so you're going to take his properties. Which property can you take? It says you can take his average type property, not his best. You don't have to go for the worst. You can take the average. So Basisha, what about a woman that wants to get her ksuba? So the husband doesn't have money, or the estate doesn't have money. They only have property, so you can collect from ziburis, only the worst type of property. Rameir says af ksubasisha bebeinis. Rameir says the ksubasisha also gets the average type property. If you go to the house, to the estate, to make one of these collections, and the person doesn't have cash, you're going to take property. Only thing is, some of the properties that this person had have already been sold. So you say, but my document precedes the sale date. So I should really have first rights. The purchaser, bought property that has a lien on it, and you could go take the correct property that you're deserving, which would be the idius, the best, or the baininus, the average. Go to there. The Mishnah says you can't, because if there still is ziburis, the worst property, by the debtor, so then you have to go to take, or even if it was damages by the person that caused the damage, by the perpetrator, you can't take the best property that's been sold. You have to take whatever is remaining in the person's possession, which is the ziburis in this case, even if it's ziburis, which was not really what you're supposed to be getting. Nevertheless, that's what he has. That's what you take.
Doesn't the court doesn't take the leased land?
Doesn't take the sold land away, because this person still has. You have to take what he has before you start taking from the mortgage, from the liens. If someone's taking from an estate where the father passed away and he left the orphans, you only take from the least of the property, the worst type. This is an interesting case. This is talking about someone that he stole a field. How do you steal a field? You take the owner out, you put, or you what's it called? Squatters. Steals the field, and he sells it.
He squats on it and
He sells it like as if it's his. The purchaser puts money into it. He starts to fix it up, fertilizes it, makes the trees grow better. He works on the field. Original owner comes back and says, "That's my field." So he has to pay him for the work, the expenses that he put into the field, because he put in work into the field, even though he didn't ask him to. He was living there on the field or doing that. But the fact is, he improved the field. He has to pay that for those expenses that he put in. However, the actual money that the person paid for the field, that the original owner doesn't have to pay. That was received by the thief. So the purchaser goes back to the thief to get those other things, which is he goes back to the thief to collect the money that he paid. Now, let's say the thief doesn't have the actual money that the purchaser paid him. Maybe he had property that was sold. So the purchaser can now go to those people that purchased property from the thief and take that property away to get his money back. So he paid for a property that wasn't his. The guy sold him the Brooklyn Bridge, right? It wasn't. He didn't even own it. He sold him something that wasn't it. So now he has to go get his money back from the. So he goes to those people that purchased it. However, when he goes to those people that purchased the other properties from this thief, he can only take the purchase money from those properties. He can't take He can't take for the enhanced consumption of produce. What would it mean, consumption of produce?
Person appropriated a field and sold it, and the buyer enhanced the field and put produce on it. Afterward, the initial owner came and reclaimed the land together with the produce from the buyer.
Oh, yeah, yeah, because the original owner reclaims the produce that was eaten, reclaims the property and the produce that was eaten. So now the purchaser goes back to the seller, who's the thief, and wants his money back. So he the seller doesn't have the money, he has to go to other people that purchase property from him. He can't take the value from those properties for the eaten produce or for the improvement of the land. And also, if you're taking food for a woman and her daughters, you can't take from Nechasim Shabadim sold property. This is like part of the ksuba, where the wife and the daughters have to be supported. So you don't take from sold property for that. The end of the Mishnah says, because of the betterment of the world. The betterment of the world applies to everything. One more case that we have here. If someone finds a lost object and he wants to return it, so the person can claim to him, 1 second, you took some of the money from the wallet.
Whoa.
You drank some of the wine from the barrel. Swear to me that you didn't. We don't do that. It's like a good Samaritan law, where we say, the guy's doing you a favor. He's returning the produce. He could have kept it. You don't make him swear that there's nothing missing.
So this phrase, tikkun olam, does that mean that there's no scriptural support?
Yeah, that's what it means. That there's no scriptural support until wait to the next page of the Gemara. But that's what a clear assumption in the Gemara is, that obviously it's just a rabbinic enactment, and to make things, to fix up situations.
You could say the same thing about the kanas of Rabbeinu Gershom, for example.
Yeah, that there's no scriptural support for that, right? Sorry. Right. They're gonna have to go back to him. Yeah, when they purchased that property from the thief, thief had debts that he had to pay back, and they purchased basically property that had liens on it. Because what was the debt that the thief had to pay back? Right. Yeah, nevertheless. Yeah. I guess it just goes to show you have to be careful who you do business with. You could end up with problems. Hillel is asking a good question. He's saying normally when you do a title search, so you have documents of debts, and people know about those documents because they had witnesses that signed on it, so that you can do a title search to find out like where are there liens on this property. In this case, you have a thief. Maybe no one knew that he had stolen this property and sold it, and then it comes back. How did the other purchasers of his property know that there was a prior debts on mortgages on these properties? How does he know that? And it doesn't matter. I mean, we try to make it that they should know, but in this case, they didn't know, and it's they'll have to go back to them and try to collect from on their own. Right.
Well, it's assumed that there was a coal in the community, and it's his fault for not finding it, right? That's the way it works.
Yeah, it's just in this case, the way we're setting up the case, where he purchased the property from him, not knowing that it was stolen, and everyone else does know, and then it turns out that it was stolen, and there's something funny over there. Okay, the Gemara starts off with Mipnei Tikkun Ha'olam. You want to say that all of these enactments, all of these are just enactments for the betterment of the world. 1 second, this is really a biblical source. It says that you have to pay from the best of your field, the best of your vineyard, when damages occur. Why did you tell me the first words of the Mishnah is that if someone damages another person, the person comes to collect the money for the damages, he has to pay from the best fields. You said that that's for the betterment of the world. That's a biblical source. We're following the view of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shmuel's view goes like this. The case would be like this. Let's say, I gotta get the props. Okay, let's say you have 3 properties: the best, the middle, and the worst. Over here, lowest, best, the middle, and the worst. I'm using the tallest over here to be.
This is that. Oh, okay.
Okay, so you have the best and middle. Okay, now for the damages, you have to pay from the best. It's the best. The biggest is probably not the one. It's probably the smallest, which is anyway. But for our, because you're dealing with value,
Best quality.
best quality.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So that gets
who's
the
best?
first.
So Rabbi Akiva's view is the best of the perpetrator. You go in to look at his portfolio and you take his very best field. Rabbi Shmuel's view is no, you take the best of the victim, but you don't take the property from the victim. No, what you do is you look at the victim's properties, you see which one is his best. Then you do a comparative to the perpetrator's properties. And even if it would go like this, that the victim's property, his very best was the worst level, would be comparable to the worst level of the perpetrator, that would be acceptable.
But you're comparing the best of the victim.
That's the victim to whatever the perpetrator has. And it could come out that even though it's the worst of the perpetrator, that's what the victim's going to get paid from. So comes along our Mishnah and says that biblically, according to Rabbi Shmuel, he may end up with the perpetrator's worst property. Comes along the rabbinic enactment and says that he has to get the victim, the perpetrator's best property. In other words, we have a biblical source that it gets the best. Yeah, but you didn't say who's best. The rabbinic enactment is that it gets the best of the perpetrator.
Well, the first opinion was more clear.
Rabbi Akiva's opinion is clear, yeah. So, but Abaya says we're following this mission is following the view of Rabbi Shmuel that says that you should really only get the best of the nizik, which is the victim. Kamash Malon, that he gets the best of the mazik. My Rabbi Shmuel, what is this Rabbi Shmuel that you're quoting to me? It says, Titania, start in a brisa. Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Karmi Yishalem, he pays the best of his field, the best of his vineyard is what he pays. Meitav Sadeh Shal Nizik, the best of the niziks of the nizik is the victim. Mazik is the perpetrator. Yeah? Should we put names on it to make it easier? Ruvain's ox goes into Shimon's field. Doesn't help us at all. I'd have to do Moshe would be the mazik, and Nachman would be the nizik. So I have like the first letters there. So Moshe is the mazik, he's the perpetrator, and Nachman is the victim. All right. So he has to pay the best of the victims of Nachman. Meitav said, make it Meitav Karmishal Nizik. Rabbi Shmuel, that's Rabbi Shmuel's view. Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Kiva says no. The pasuk is telling me that you have to take the best of the property, and it's referring to the best property of the mazik, of the perpetrator. That's Rabbi Kiva's view. But kal v'chomer lahekdesh, for sure for hekdesh. Okay, what does it mean for sure for hekdesh? Maybe we'll get to it today. We'll discuss it. Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara asked the question. The Gemara has an assumption here that you look at the victim's property and then you go over to you see which one is his best property. And then the damages that were done to the property, okay, the damage that were done to the property may have been done to the worst property of the victim. But that's not what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the best property of the victim, and then we're going to go over to the perpetrator and make him pay whatever's comparable to that. The Gemara has an assumption that the payment here is not for the actual damage, but for a comparable damage to the best property of the victim.
So 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3,
See, really, there was damage that was done. There was damage that was done to the
First property of the victim.
worst property of the victim.
Yeah. He ate his turnips.
Now, we instead of taking the best property of the perpetrator and to pay for that, what we do is we go to the victim's properties, we look at all three of them, we see which one is his best. The Gemara is assuming now that we imagine that the damage was done to the best property instead of his worst. Now we do a comparative to the perpetrator's properties, and he has to pay. The perpetrator pays his worst property, which is comparable to the victim's best property, for the damages that were not really done to that, were done to his worst property. Anyway, that's what the Gemara is assuming him. But the Gemara asks, Rabbi Shmuel, I get if he eats fat property, then good. But then he has to pay his best property. But if he ate from the worst property, does he have to pay for damages that were not even done to the best property? He has to pay for that.
Yeah.
So Ravidi Baravin suggests an answer. He says, well, the whole row of produce is gone. We don't know, was this good produce, was this bad produce? So what he has to do is he has to pay for the best. Amar Rava says, let's say you knew that it was the worst produce. You can look at the cameras and you can see. Now it's gone, but you can see what it is. Mishalim Chushi would have to pay for the worst produce. Hasta Delayadina, but now that you don't know what was there, Mishalim Shmini has to pay for the best. For that, you would have to bring a proof. If you're trying to extract money, you would have to prove that your damages were higher. And you're not proving that, you're just guessing. And Elamar Ravacha Bar Yaakov gives another interpretation. We're on top of what we're talking about is that the best property of the victim is like the worst property of the perpetrator. Rabbi Shmuel says it's not that I have to pay damages that were done to the best property, damages as if they were done to the best property of the. No, I'm just talking about from what source of payment does it come from? It comes from a comparative quality to the victim's best property, which is the way we understood it before, but the Gemara had to go through this to tell us it's not anything else. Rabbi Kiva okay, Kiva says that you judge the payment comes from the best property of the perpetrator. Best property. But it's not that you're paying for something that you didn't damage, you're paying for what you damaged, just what's the source? It would be like, can you pay back a debt in pennies? What are you going to do with all these pennies? You have to schlep it somewhere, you can't change it, and all of that. So here they're giving you a property that's very difficult to work with. But if they give you the best property, they give you, then that's like easier to deal with.
Or it's the same value, but it's the best property, not like a quarter of an acre of this best land instead of 3 acres of desert land.
Right, exactly. Right.
So the definition of best and worst, there are a lot of ways you could define that. You can define it as the easiest to resell, or the most fertile ground, or the one that's terraced.
As an agricultural, it would have to be the most fertile ground. That's what I assume. The easiest to work, you could grow anything there, that type of
the best soil.
Best soil.
I would think the most desirable could be easy to sell.
Right. But the best, what would that be? The easiest to sell would probably be the most fertile soil. Maybe it's location. Yeah, could be. Okay, my time with Rabbi Shmuel. What's the reason for Rabbi Shmuel? Nemer Sadal Matav and Nemer Sadal. Where does Rabbi Shmuel get this? It's like a wild thing where you have to go from this person's portfolio to that person's comparative and do this. Where does he get this from? So the Gemara says Nemer Sadal Matav. It says when it comes to the payment of the damages, it says that he has to pay meitav. Meitav means the best. But Nemer Sadal Lamayla, and it also says the word sada when it comes to the actual damages. It says meitav sadeu, and it says bir b'steyacha. Masada Amur Lamaila Bidenizik, just like when it spoke about the damages, whose field was being damaged? The victim, of course. Afsada Amur Lamata, also when it comes to the payments, but which type of payment? You use the best of the victims to pay, which means the comparative to the best of the victims that the perpetrator owns, he has to give that to the victim. Okay, Rabbi Kiva says, no, Meitav Sadeyu Yishalim. You just look at the pasuk. The pasuk says that the best of his field he pays. It's the one that's paying. It's his best. Just read it literally, and that's what it means. Rabbi Yishmael, what does Rabbi Yishmael do with that? Rabbi Yishmael says, I use the pasuk as well. He says, I have a use for the verbal analogy, which is sada here and sada there. It says it's the field that will get damaged, the field that gets paid. Same person. And I also use the pasuk. And I use the verbal analogy to tell me that I have to compare the portfolios of the different properties that they own, and then I do that arrangement. It pays the worst of this, the best of that, and all of that. However, but I also use the pasuk. Let's say the perpetrator has only two fields. He has a very good field, and he has a very lousy field. The ziburis today, but his lousy field, it's not, doesn't reach the level of the best of the victim. Now, what we were saying before is that I have three properties of the 1, 2, 3 of the perpetrator, and then I have three properties of the victim, 1, 2, 3. And the worst of the perpetrator would be equivalent to the best of the victim. And then we're saying that he can give his worst because that's equivalent. That's what Rabbi Yishmael is doing. But now we're saying that Rabbi Yishmael has one other detail here. That let's say he only has two fields, his best and his worst. The perpetrator has two fields, his best and his worst. Now, the best is not the best, and the best is not the level of the worst. Best is in the middle. So what does the perpetrator need to pay? Does he need to pay his worst, which is not as good as the best of the victim, or does he need to pay his best, which is way better than the best of the victim? It's not exactly, it doesn't match up exactly like we would like it for this. So it comes along Rabbi Yishmael and says, I used the pasuk to teach me that he has to give his best. He would only be able to give his worst if it was actually equivalent.
Oh, wow.
But if it's not equivalent, so then he has to give his best. So Rabbi Yishmael says, look, I have a use for the pasuk. It's when it doesn't match up perfectly, I have to give the best. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm sorry, no, this is a new piece. Rabbi Akiva says that the pasuk is teaching me that the damages are collected from the best of the property and kal v'chemer for hektish. The Gemara says, my kal v'chemer hektish. What are you talking about, kal v'chemer hektish? What do you mean? Kal v'chemer means for sure, or for sure.
What's that for sure?
Oh, for sure.
How much more so?
How much more so? So for hektish is consecrated property. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? Ilema is the case that you're talking about, the nakhi tur didan tur de hektish. One of a regular person's ox gores the ox that belongs to hektish. Had ox belong to hektish? And someone made maybe it was a carbon, I don't know. Belonged to hektish. Maybe it was just whatever. It can't be that he has to pay for the best from the best of his property, because we have a rule that it says if your ox gores an ox of your friend, and the Gemara says an ox of your friend, but not an ox of hektish. When it gores an ox of hektish, you actually exempt. You don't have to pay. So, but this is the opinion that we're following here. Rather, we're not talking about this. We're talking about a case where someone says, I'm going to give 100 coins to the temple upkeep. Thus he gives that the person that's in charge of the temple upkeep shows up at the guy's house, says, where's the 100 coins? He says, I don't have 100 coins. So, okay, we'll take your property. He takes his best property. The one says, 1 second, shouldn't take the best property. He just has a regular debt. And a regular debt, that's only the intermediate property. It's not the best. And maybe Rabbi Kiva holds that a Baal Chayv takes from the best. the superior property. The Gemara says, no. You won't be able to say this because maybe, you see, if you say that a Baal Chayv, a creditor, is at the same level as someone that's a victim of damages, and you can take both from the best property, but when it comes to Hektish coming to collect, Hektish can't collect anything. Because you will say like this, that when it comes to damages, the regular person can take from the best property. Thank you. Tonight after my house, if I bring it. When it comes to damages, so he takes the best property. When it comes to collecting a debt, then it's when it comes to collecting a debt, Rabbi Akiva's view says that it's the same like the damages. But if same like the damages, then by Hektish, if he damages Hektish, he doesn't get anything. He doesn't have to pay at all. How are you going to say that when it comes to Hektish, he has to pay from the best? You're gonna have a problem with that. So the Gemara says, you have to go back to the original case. A person's ox scores Hektish. And we said that you're pater. You don't have to pay at all. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva Savalak Reb Shimon ben Menasya. Rabbi Akiva is going to hold like Reb Shimon ben Menasya's a unique view. The Tanya taught in a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Menasya. Reb Shimon ben Menasya says, Shershel Hektish and Agach Shershel Hedit pater. If an ox of Hektish gores, a consecrated ox gores a regular person's ox, so the guy shows up at the base of Mikdash and says, I might need you to pay me. The rule is the house always wins, right? Did you see there? So he's gonna be, the Hektish is gonna be pater. They're not gonna pay him. Shel Hedit Shenagach l'Shar Shel Hektish goes the other way. Bein tam bein muad, whether it's a tame ox or whether it's an ox that's used to goring, which after 3 times it has to pay full price. If it's a tame ox, it only pays half price for the damages. So mishalim nezek shalom, but over here he has to pay full price. So we still use the shor re'eyo. Only if it's an ox of your friend, where you have to make a differentiation between if it's tame or if it's a muad. But over here you always have to pay full price. So what we're saying is that if you have to pay full price for damages, and if you have to pay damages from the best of the property, so maybe so for Hektish you have to pay for sure from the best of the property. If you damage Hektish, for sure from the best of your property, the perpetrator's property. Yihachi, if this is the case, that there's a machlekes here between the first opinion of the Mishnah and Rabbi Akiva, and the machlekes is when it gores Hektish, does he have to pay? When your ox scores Hektish, do you have to pay Hektish, right? How do you know that Rabbi Akiva is arguing with Rabbi Yishmael regarding how to measure the best property, the superior property? Do I look at the superior of the perpetrator as the superior of the victim? How do you know that's the machlekes? Maybe everyone holds that you look at the superior property of the victim and that you do the comparative to the perpetrators. But the whole machlekes, all Rabbi Akiva is saying maybe is that when he gores Hektish, you have to pay full price. And according to the Rabbanan, according to the first opinion in the Mishnah, you don't have to pay at all. How do you know that? You got into a discussion here about something that maybe the Mishnah is not even discussing. The Rabbi Akiva Savalak Reb Shimon ben Menasya, which means that if a regular person's ox scores Hektish, he has to pay full price. Rabbi Shmuel Savalak Rabbanan, Rabbi Shmuel says he doesn't have to pay at all. He's pater. Gemara says in Cain, my loy bahakasav. You have to reread the Mishnah. Look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that it wasn't the Mishnah; it was the brisa, right? Was it the brisa? Yeah, it was the Tanya. Where was it? Was it in the Mishnah? Leiba Akasav? It's a brisa, right? Yeah, it's the Tanya. We're starting a brisa. The Gemara quoted the brisa. Rabbi Akiva says, Leiba Akasav aligos minasai. The whole pasuk is only coming to tell me. That means that he's obviously arguing with him about what Rabbi Yishmael had said already. He can't be introducing a new statement. So he says the whole pasuk is not telling me that; it's only telling me something else. He has to be arguing about. That's point number one. Void my kal v'chomer lehekdesh. Also, how could he make a kal v'chomer lehekdesh if hekdesh? What we're saying is, hekdesh is much more strict, and kal v'chomer lehekdesh would mean that if you have to pay the best of your, that if you're saying you don't have to pay the best of your property, you only have to pay the best of the victim's property. Kal v'chomer lehekdesh, but that's a leniency, and hekdesh is more strict. It can't be kal v'chomer lehekdesh. If he agrees with him that he only has to pay the best of the nizik, then that would be a leniency, and hekdesh would be a kal v'chomer to be more strict. Void. And another problem is, Ha'amar Ravashi clearly says, Tanya Behedya, he has a brisa that says, Meitav Sadeo, Meitav Karmer Yishalim, the best of his field, the best of his vineyard he pays, Meitav Sadeo Shal Nizik, Meitav Karmer Shal Nizik, the Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says that he has to pay the best of the victim. Rabbi Kiva says, Meitav Sadeo Shal Mazik, Meitav Karmer Shal Mazik. That clearly it's referring to the perpetrator. Let's leave it right here. Let's leave it right there. Okay. For those that are able to tonight, for bringing it at my house after my birthday. Okay. Tomorrow's the fast. Regular time tomorrow. We'll learn. Fast starts approximately 5:11 or something.
Thank you.
Okay. AM, yeah.
When is it,
8:47, I think.